What's going on, guys? If you are thinking about when is the best time of the year to sell my home in Greater Atlanta or Alpharetta, Georgia, this video is for you because we're going to dive in on what to expect throughout each of the months. And this is the flip video to what I did for the buyer's perspective. So if you haven't checked that out and you are curious on how to go about it from a buyer side, I've recorded that and we'll link it down below. Now, as a seller, you have a ton of options when it comes to selling a home for Greater Atlanta because Atlanta is a very transient city. We have relocation all year round. We have great schools. We have a big spring market, and there is usually always a buyer in the market weekly. That's one of the big reasons I tell clients a lot of times, depending on what we're seeing with the activity on their home, it's not necessarily uncommon to, let's say, go 30 or 45 days on the market, and the seller may think it's stale or getting stale, and then all of a sudden in a week, we get 2 or multiple offers. And that's kind of just the ebbs and flows of Alpharetta and Atlanta as a whole, and things you have to be mindful of going in as a seller. I think one of the challenges that owners face a lot of times is agents as they're going through the motions, especially on the listing side. We're so used to properties flying off the shelf. And now as things normalize a bit and we start accruing more days on market, it's important to try and figure out how can you reposition the property differently weekly and get in front of new buyers rather than just hacking purchase price. And I think that's a common go-to for agents because it's easier. It's easier to go to the sellers and say, hey, we're not getting a whole lot of activity. It's got to be the sales price. We need to reduce the price. And while that may be the case, it could just be a different positioning on marketing, or you're not getting in front of the right audience. So it's definitely something I would keep in mind as a seller. Don't be afraid to ask those questions of your agents and hold them accountable as to what are they doing on a weekly or monthly basis to try and get the home in front of the right audience if it's not selling. Now let's just start at the top of the year. As far as January and February goes, these used to be kind of no man's land months. What would kick off a pre-spring market was going to be after the Super Bowl in mid-February. That's when we started seeing a lot of things creep up, especially the past 5 years and after COVID, as the market got into a little bit of a frenzy. Properties were just kind of coming up all year round, and there were so few of them available that buyers were snagging them up even during down months. Now, what we've seen is even though inventory is increasing a bit, it's still pretty active as far as all year round for finding the right buyer. For properties that were listed in the fourth quarter of the previous year, maybe they just came off for the holidays or they already have some marketing done. Let's say they have great photos or videos from last year when it was already green. I don't think there's a real reason to hesitate going back to market immediately in January after New Year's or February, because you're looking at that knowing that, hey, I already have the digital collateral and marketing that showcases the house in the best light, but I'm competing with less sellers overall because I'm getting ahead of the spring market. And that's where kind of that beginning of January to March timeframe is a great opportunity for sellers to potentially net a higher sales price or a quick offer or an offer that's close to list price, just because they either have something that had already been done previously, or they're just capturing buyers when buyers feel like there's not a whole lot of options. Now, this is a big tool that I do offer clients as well, where let's say you're not listing until next year, or we have a meeting and say, my child is a junior right now. We're going to be moving out once they complete senior year. What we'll actually do is we'll come in and wait for the best time of year. We'll let you get the house ready, and then we're going to do the video and filming ahead of time. And I'll just hold that in my back pocket, wait until you're ready. So that way, if you go to sell the house and the timing doesn't necessarily make sense from like a weather perspective or time of year, we already have all the digital collateral showcasing your house in the best light. So that way you can go to market any time of year. And that's a service I offer to all clients. It's an out-of-pocket expense for me on the front end, but we're playing the long game to make sure that we get you the proper value for your home. Now, outside of that January, February timeframe, we start getting into March. March is a little bit of a tricky month because we do see the weather start warming up a little bit. In my experience for Greater Atlanta, we typically have one warm week and then a final freeze. And that final freeze is what ends up killing off everything that had bloomed previously, and we have to wait for the cycle to start over. So what we're looking for is kind of after that secondary freeze, we know that spring is probably here. we can start thinking about, okay, what can we do as far as getting things as green as possible, putting mulch or pine straw down, working on the exterior, and making sure the property is photo ready. It's easy with the interior, you can handle that all year round, but we really only get so many shots showcasing the exterior in the best light as possible, especially if we're doing things like twilight or there's big landscaping or hardscaping that you've sunk a lot of money into. We want to make sure that the buyer falls in love with those features as well and showcase them in the best possible light. So March is usually a big prep month from what we see, and historically, April is the main month that kicks off the true spring market. It's also the month that your home is likely going to sell for the most amount from a historical data perspective in Greater Atlanta. And this is just because a lot of people are moving around the school years. So they will put their house on the market and they'll try and negotiate either a longer close to get through the end of the school year in May, or some sort of rent or lease back contingency as well, that they'll be able to close on the property but still have access to live into it until the school year ends, and they can get out around the timing that works best for them. So as a seller, just know that your main window as far as the spring market is going to be anywhere from about mid-March to the end of June. Once we get through June, we've seen most of the school transfers actually take place for those that are in Georgia or trying to get into the new school years here. But what that doesn't account for is people moving and relocating from other parts of the country. Atlanta is a huge feeder hub where we have a ton of relocation and referral activity, and a lot of those other school systems don't operate on the same calendar year that we do. We may see them going back as late as Labor Day, which means that their real hunting season for a house is going to be in July and August, because their kids are still in school in June when everything else is kind of finalizing here in Atlanta. So if you've missed the boat and you're not worried about getting into a new school, maybe you're just an empty nester or downsizing or relocating out of state, I wouldn't worry a whole lot about July and August. Know that you may get a little bit less and there may be slightly less activity than if it was a few months earlier, but there is still healthy buyer activity around. It's really when we get into September and October, this is where things get a little bit tricky. By now, schools have pretty much started everywhere, and we aren't quite at the phase of our fourth quarter push where we see a bunch of the relocations coming in from hiring. September and early October are usually months that I try to avoid if we can, as far as a listing goes. Now, this is going to depend a little bit just based on the timing for the seller, and something that is important to consider if you know that, let's say, you're absolutely going to have to get the house on the market by end of October or November or December. The weather here is different those months, so I would at least take the opportunity in September or early October to showcase the house, get the photography, the videography, the drone footage done, and just hold that for the extra month or two to make sure that you have better marketing collateral when you do end up hitting the market. Let's say it's in November or December. If you are able to push a little bit, the end of October, November, and December timeframe are our second busiest time of the year. Now, I know this seems counterintuitive because it is the holiday selling season, but what we see are companies start doing their budgets for the next calendar year, and they're getting new employees in with a spike in hiring and relocations before the end of December. This can be a great opportunity as a seller to take advantage of a late last-minute shopper that is looking to be in their home before the end of the year. There's some tax advantages you can work around, or also if you're just thinking about renting your property, we do have a pretty good flow of rental leads in the November and December timeframe. Once we kind of get into that push of the end of the year, things around Thanksgiving break and the holidays, what you want to look for as a seller, if you're going to be selling your home in those times, make sure that even if you're decorating, that you have marketing that shows the home when it's not decorated, especially online. What we want to avoid is that there's a ton of holiday decor in online photos and people can't really see what it would be like the rest of the year, or it's sometimes hard to look past that as they're envisioning themselves living there. Now, something that's interesting is, let's say Thanksgiving break or around Christmas and the holiday season, end of the year, that's when a lot of people are actually off work. They're spending time with their families, and there's an opportunity to take a step back and potentially tour homes. So I would kind of look at that as an opportunity to capture buyers, but just making sure you're going about it the right way. So while I think there is an opportunity to capture market share any month of the year, depending on when you're going on the market, there are very strategic ways I would go about it. Now, if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to dive into it a little bit further or talk to you about what a curated marketing plan for your home may look like. But I hope to see you all in the next one. Thanks so much for watching the video, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.